Hello friends, welcome again to the Common Sense Science Association of India. Today's topic of discussion is gravity. All of us are familiar with gravity. It is believed that it alone endows matter with weight, and if Earth's gravity were to suddenly disappear, then all unattached objects will become weightless and float away into space. It is also believed that the entire solar system's galaxies, in fact the universe itself, has formed, evolved, is held together and is functioning because of the existence of this force. However, in spite of its purported universal presence, it is the most mysterious and least understood force. The belief that gravity exists is so deeply entrenched in our minds from generations that if someone were to suggest that gravity does not exist, he would instantly be dubbed as crazy or insane. However, surprisingly, this is exactly what Newton himself opined in his later years. In fact, in a letter written to Robert Boyle, he specifically denies the existence of such a force and instead attributes gravity as an effect arising from the interaction between the mass contained in celestial bodies and the ether pervading the entire continuum of space. These are his exact words. Is not this medium much denser within the dense bodies of the sun, stars, planets and comets than in the empty celestial spaces between them? And in passing from them to great distances, doth it not grow rarer and rarer perpetually, and thereby cause the gravity of these great bodies towards one another, and the parts towards the bodies, every body endeavoring to go from the rarer parts of the medium towards the denser? And though this decrease of density may at great distances be exceedingly low, yet as the elastic force of this medium be exceedingly great, it may suffice to impel bodies from the rarer parts of the medium towards the denser with all the power we call gravity. Interestingly, Newton also hypothesized that the gradient density ether would cause starlight passing close to huge celestial bodies to bend because of refraction. The following figure that was created earlier by observing the physical qualities of space concurs with the ether theory of gravity hypothesized by Newton almost 300 years ago. This theory was rejected by his contemporaries for two reasons. One, by this time his earlier theory had widely been accepted by the contemporary scientific community and hence firmly established itself. Two, Newton could not explain the gradient density of the ether. Hence, his later theory, which hypothesized gravity as a field instead of a force, remained buried in his books. It is only because of the advent of the internet that it has resurfaced again. Since most of today's scientific community is either unaware of his later views or are aware but do not agree with them, gravity still remains to be a mystery. Almost 200 years after Newton's discovery of gravity, Einstein one day suddenly realized that a person falling freely from a very tall building would be unable to feel his own weight as he is now falling along with the gravitational force. In other words, his weight and the weight of any other object also would be zero during free fall. He described this event, which led him to write the equivalence principle as the best moment of his life. However, it is strange that even until today nobody has realized that this brilliant thought experiment can be used to find out with 100% certainty if a gravitational force really exists or not. Let's assume that the elevator shown in the animation is at the topmost floor of a very tall building inside which a person and an object of mass 200 kg are resting on two different weighing scales. If the elevator's cables were to snap suddenly, it, along with everything inside it, will go into a free fall due to which the weight indicated on both the scales will be zero. If gravity is really present, then the person should be able to lift up the 200 kg object effortlessly. However, if he has to apply force to lift up the object, then it is explicitly clear that such a force does not exist. Since this experiment is dangerous and can be performed only by an expert stuntman, we can adopt the experiment illustrated in the video. We need a hollow contraption as illustrated in the video, weighing scale, iron block of 250 grams, an electromagnet, along with necessary batteries and timer. A video camera fitted inside the contraption would be an added benefit. The distance between the electromagnet and the object should be adjusted such that when it is switched on, it should be capable of lifting up an object of at least 150 grams. The contraption must be dropped from a considerable height with the timer set to switch on in 1 or 2 seconds after free fall has begun. If the weight of the object really becomes zero, then the electromagnet's attraction will pull up the object, which will then attach itself to it. However, if the object retains its weight, then it will continue to remain resting on the weighing scale even after free fall is completed. In the experiments I conducted, the object was always resting on the weighing scale during and after free fall, proving beyond doubt that a gravitational force does not exist and that weight is an inherent property of matter and not a property endowed by gravity. Some videos posted by reputed space agencies show similar experiments where an object hanging from a tension spring immediately appears to rise up when the contraption is dropped, giving the impression that the object's weight has really become zero. However, what is really happening here is that when the contraption is dropped, the downward motion is not immediately transferred to the object. It remains stationary, as in the case of a slinky spring, until the spring closes completely due to the descent of the contraption and will only then begin to fall along with it. In the above experiment, we should not use a permanent magnet because it will also behave like a tension spring. When the contraption is dropped, the object inside will fall a fraction of a second later due to the magnet's attraction, because of which the gap between it and the magnet is greatly reduced. As a result, it will attach itself to the magnet, giving the false impression that its weight has become zero. Interested persons should personally conduct this simple experiment and verify the results for their own satisfaction. As hypothesized by Newton in his later years, as gravitational force does not exist, which means that mass and weight are one and the same. When an object is thrown up, it decelerates because of the downward force arising from its heaviness. After reaching maximum height, it begins to descend, again because of its heaviness, and accelerates due to the potential energy stored in it. Mass is defined as the amount of matter in an object, and its unit of measurement is kilograms. It is also referred to as the inertia of an object. Weight is defined as the acceleration due to gravity acting on the object, and its unit of measurement is newtons. We accept this as the absolute truth. However, there is a dichotomy in this theory, which we will now discuss. As per this theory, irrespective of whether gravity is present or not, to move an object through a certain distance by overcoming its inertia, the same amount of force is always needed. To push or pull the cube illustrated in Figure 3 horizontally across line BD, an appropriate force has to be applied. Let us neglect frictional forces. Similarly, to lift the cube vertically upwards, we have to apply force, which is more than its weight, 9,800 Newton, that is force of gravity acting on it. Now, if we for a moment visualize that gravity is absent, we will still have to apply the same amount of force as before to push or pull the object horizontally, whereas to lift it, we will require very little force as its weight, as per current theory, is now zero. We cannot practically verify this theory as we cannot switch off gravity. However, with a little bit of logical reasoning, we can prove that this theory is wrong. Let us visualize that gravity is still absent and that the cube is turned on its side so that surface B is now facing downwards as illustrated in Figure 4. If we apply the same reasoning as before, now we will have to apply force across AC to overcome its inertia and make it move, whereas to lift it very little effort is required. Wait a minute, this is where the dichotomy arises. Does this mean that inertia across BD has now vanished and now exists across AC? Definitely not, because mass or inertia, which is an inherent property of matter, is not dependent on any directions, unlike weight, which always acts towards the center of Earth's mass. Since in Figure 3 we had to apply force across BD to overcome inertia and move the object, it is only logical to presume that in Figure 4 also, if not more, we will have to apply at least the same amount of force to move it in the upward direction. This dichotomy becomes more clearly evident when think of a cube whose mass is a few thousand tons or more. Conclusion: even in the absence of gravity, objects cannot be lifted up effortlessly, as we still have to overcome inertia in the upward direction, meaning that the weight will not become zero. The following reasons also highlight why an independent gravitational force cannot exist. 1. Although it is the weakest of the four fundamental forces in nature, its range is supposed to be infinite, which lacks a proper scientific explanation. 2. Throughout nature, only opposite forces attract, whereas like forces, unlike gravity, repel one another. 3. Force of gravity acting on an object is supposed to depend only on its mass and not surface area, whereas in case of all other forces in nature, it depends on the surface area. This means that irrespective of whether an object of unit mass is in the shape of a sphere, cube, a long-drawn wire, or a thin sheet, etc., the gravitational force will magically detect it and act accordingly. To behave in this manner, it has to be an intelligent force. This property of gravity defies a logical and scientific explanation. 4. It is believed that it cannot be shielded against, which again lacks a scientific explanation. 5. Any force that is capable of accelerating objects needs a constant source of energy, which is missing in the case of gravity. 6. A force requires force carriers, and in the case of gravity, they are hypothesized as gravitons, which however have not been detected till date. 7. When an object tied to an elastic band is thrown horizontally, it will travel a certain distance, after which it will come back because the kinetic energy stored in the band as potential energy again gets converted into kinetic energy while returning. When an object is thrown up vertically, it eventually falls down due to what is known as the gravitational potential energy, which means that the energy expended while throwing is stored by gravity. This explanation is not at all rational because, unlike the elastic band, gravity is not a physical entity which can store energy and then release it. It is actually supposed to be a force which by itself is capable of causing falling objects to accelerate. If gravity really existed, then the object should fall down with a greater rate of acceleration than when it went up because it would now be acted upon by two forces: potential energy stored in the object and gravity. 8. If Moon is truly exerting an attractive force on the Earth, then the weight of unattached objects on Earth should vary depending on the Moon's position, which however is not the case. 9. During solar eclipse, the Moon's presence in between the Sun and Earth does not have even a partial effect on Earth's orbital path, and similarly during lunar eclipse, although the Earth comes in between the Sun and Moon, the Moon's orbital path is not affected even slightly. 10. Current theory asserts that the strength of Moon's gravity is 1/6 that of Earth's. NASA sent 6 manned missions to the Moon where they conducted numerous experiments including the feather and hammer test. Why didn't they conduct a simple weighing experiment, which would have illustrated to the entire world that the strength of gravity on the Moon is really 1/6 that of Earth's? There can be only one reason behind this silence, and that is the experiment was conducted but the results did not conform to the current theory. I'm sure that most people will find it hard to believe the contents of this article in spite of all the evidence provided because, as per the following quote by Dresden James, "A truth's initial commotion is directly proportional to how deeply the lie was believed. When a well-packaged web of lies has been gradually sold to the masses from generations, knowingly or unknowingly, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic." Example: just a few hundred years back, people who suggested that the Sun was at the center of the solar system were called crazy and persecuted, as the then prevailing view was that the Earth was at the center of the solar system. However, we know that what was then thought of as crazy is now actually true. For more information on gravity, read Newton's letter to Robert Boyle and my book, The 7 Deadly Misconceptions, that is based on Newton's gravitational ether theories.